Christianity in the United States is aging. Just 30 years ago, in the 1990s, about 90% of Americans identified as Christian. But in the past few decades, that number has declined significantly, and the difference is especially obvious in Americans under 50 years old. The concerns around this issue have been the focus of many Christian programs for years now, with seminars and training initiatives that focus on finding ways to get millennials back in church. But these days, millennials are no longer the youngest generation of adults, and the trends in young people detaching themselves from religious organizations has just continued to grow even faster. Many conversations about young people in church focus on theological and social disagreements. They'll often focus on differences in ideas about gender roles, race relations, climate change, and sexual orientation. And when you look at the data, those are definitely major areas of difference. But what if politics and theology aren't the whole story? What if there's more separating us than we realize? In the United States, Generation Z is the first generation to grow up having social media around them for their entire lives. They're the first true digital natives, the first to have access to smartphone technology as children, and the first to be exposed to so many mass shootings, climate disasters, and social movements on a near daily basis. They spent several of their more formative years in the COVID-19 pandemic, which interrupted major milestones like high school and college graduations. And although both millennials and Gen Z spend a lot of time online, we may not be crossing paths as much as you might think. The differences between Gen Z and their elder generations aren't just about moral codes and traditions. They're often experiencing the world in a completely different way. Does the future of church still look like buildings and sermons? Or is the future of Christianity something far more interactive, more versatile, and more involved? In this episode, we interviewed Lindsay Gisbert, who is currently studying at Walla Walla University. Lindsay works as a student DJ for a local radio station and finished among the top 10 finalists in NPR's 2022 National Public Radio Student Podcast Challenge. We'll talk about the relationship obstacles between millennials, Gen Z, and the church right here on Bridges Over Walls.
I had my first iPod Touch when I was in elementary school.
Right.
And then I got a phone for the first time in 4th grade. So I've kind of been online for most of my life, whether that's good or bad.
So it's interesting, as Generation Z, which Pew Research defines as basically being born, the millennial generation cuts off about 1997. And then you guys are the 15 years after that. Now millennials and Gen Z, by many of our elders, are still being lumped together. But we're reaching the oldest millennials are in their 40s.
Right.
You know what I mean? We are not, we're not the young generation anymore, of adults anymore.
We don't get much interaction with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a lot of benefit and a lot of good that could come from connecting more.
Yeah, and the world has changed quickly. So my parents were in their early 20s when I was born. I mean, my mom had barely turned 21. And my dad was just a few years older than her. Interracial marriage became legal in my dad's lifetime.
That's crazy.
My dad's not an old man.
Yeah.
He's right around 60.
Mm-hmm.
It's only a generation or two ago that was the reality for the world. I mean, women getting credit cards is pretty recent, and having bank accounts. Even at 31, I remember dial-up internet. I remember home phones.
I loved the home phone. I really did.
It's weird to think about now. I talked to my mom and I'm like, if you were driving from one state to another,
Mm-hmm.
if you were doing a long trip by yourself, how did people know where you were or if you're okay? And she's like, oh no, I got caught in a blizzard. I had to walk to a random house. She was telling me all these stories where she's like, I couldn't call anybody. I didn't have a cell phone,
Cannot physically imagine.
No.
Because since I've been alive, it's been I need my mom. Phone.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're just done.
And you assume that most people have something on them to be able to be contacted. And maybe they don't want to answer, but they have the ability. Right. And that's a pretty different world. I meet most people online today first
Mm-hmm.
and follow them for a good 6 months, a year, sometimes 3 years before I meet them in person. And I mean, just this morning, I walked into the coffee shop here on campus and there were 3 different people that I've never met in person. And
But
they were
you
just
follow
like,
them.
yeah. And they're like, are you Caleb? I'm like, yeah. Are you Mitchell Powers? Like, nice to meet you.
And it feels like you know them because you've been following them.
Right.
So it's like, oh, I know your dog.
Yep.
I know your boyfriend.
Yep.
Like, I've been a part of your life for so long, haven't I? It's the wildest thing. And then it's always awkward if you know them by like their username
Yes.
and not their real name.
Yes.
Because then you see them and it's like, can't call you Nacho Monster. That would be awkward. Whoops.
There was one person, I was walking down the stairs of the coffee shop and I made eye contact with them and they're sitting there drinking their coffee and it was like locked on. It was just like straight. And it was like, I've seen you on Twitter and you've seen me on Twitter. And for the life of me, I do not know your name and I'm sorry, but I'm going to treat you like an old friend now.
You have to bear the awkward and say, I know you. That's the beauty of the internet.
Yep. Oh man. So it's interesting, as Generation Z, COVID is kind of, whether long-term this sticks or not, it happened during a lot of your high school and college experiences. It got rid of a lot of like milestone things.
Yeah.
When I hear people older than us talk about COVID and education, I hear the negative a lot, right? Where it's like, oh, they're going to be 2 years dumber. Like they just didn't learn anything for 2 years. And I'm like, well, I don't think that's really true. Like there's other things you learn besides math. There's also like time management.
Huge,
right? Like,
huge deal to learn time management.
Which impacts your life, if not as much, probably more than math does. I mean, there's a whole lot of things being taught here. Just the fact that the world can change quickly.
Yeah, a lot of people did super great in online school when COVID happened because you could be asynchronous. You could go at your own pace. And for a lot of students, for a lot of young people, that was amazing because you're not sitting in class for 8 hours a day and then your teachers are mad at you because you're restless and you want to talk and and it's like you can take those breaks to have social time and then you can set aside time to do homework and it can be a nice mix tailored perfectly to your personality. But I think it also changed our outlook on loneliness a lot. And I think a lot of people think, oh yeah, being on the internet is like what brings them ultra comfort, and we realize no, like in-person interaction matters a lot. I'm like, we were so tired of TikTok and there's only so much you can get from online. And I was having Skype calls with my friends doing our nails and having a virtual slumber party because there was nothing else to do. And it was like, we did begin to value in-person time and going out together to do things like that. And we were breaking our necks trying to creatively find ways to do that. I have friends who ask me out to coffee now way more than beforehand. It used to be like, oh, I don't want to drive 30 minutes. And now it's like 30 minutes, that's nothing. Let's do it. So this urgency for connection and this urgency for being present with other people became really real. And we just started to value relationships a lot more because we realized like this can be taken away. And so it kind of made us really grateful. And I think that was really needed, but it also really helped people who thought that they were terrible students to realize maybe I'm not a terrible student. I think it gave us a confidence to summons of like, hey, we have these skills our parents don't have of using Teams, Zoom, like we can be helpful. My mom was like buying a selfie light. She was like, I need a light. What is a ring light? And I was like, oh, I can help you.
Yeah.
And so that created really fun conversations just in the home too of like, you can help me, I can help you. I was asking for help on homework more often because we were spending more time together.
And one thing that I've noticed that I don't know how to overcome in connecting with Gen Z, I have a family member and she generally was on her phone during, Christmas and holidays and family reunions and things. And so I really hadn't heard her talk much. It felt impossible to know her because I didn't know how to build trust. I didn't know how to interact in a way that she could relate to. Again, maybe this is just me and just her, but I found myself thinking about that for years where I'm just like, did I do something wrong? No, this is how she was kind of interacting with everybody.
Right.
Have you been in the side where you're kind of like surviving by accessing your world here and then you're existing in the rest?
A lot of the times it's if you feel excluded from the conversation, we often feel like we're the annoying, younger voice and no one wants to hear us because I'm 21 now and I still often feel like they're like, the adults are having a conversation without me, right? And like they're talking about taxes and that has nothing to do with me. I don't pay taxes. And so that also can make us very introspective and, exclude ourselves from conversations. There is this crutch of just like being on your phone and being in your world and with people who understand you and who are connecting, in a way that you understand. Because I have that, and I'm on the older end of my generation, so I have family members who are younger than me and who do the same thing. They kind of retreat in on their phones, and it's the feeling of being excluded, of the adults are having conversation, they're not involving us. Like, you'll ask about school, but that's a very vague question, and there's not necessarily a lot to talk about there. When you're on your phone, you can be with your friends who are talking about things you're interested in.
Yeah.
And so I always appreciated, like, my dad was always really good at being like that, and like, what are you looking at? Tell me more. Show me the TikTok.
Yeah.
Show me the weird Instagram video. And then that's how connections built. It's just showing that interest and asking those questions.
And there's just like a whole separate world of where you get your information. I noticed this last night. We're staying in a hotel because we're here in Walla Walla, Washington, which is about 4 hours from where I live. And I sit down in my bed and I'm like, man, I really want to watch this show called Alone. Like, I'm like 7 episodes in, like I'm invested. And I start to think to turn on the TV because that's where I usually watch it. And I'm like, oh, this is cable. And it struck me where I'm like, you can't choose what you want to watch here.
No, you can't.
And like, I don't like this.
I don't think anyone likes cable.
So I have my little phone screen that I'm literally holding like this. And I'm like, well, this isn't ideal either, but at least I can choose what I'm doing,
It's insane that concept even exists anymore. Every time I go to a hotel and I'm like, cable. What's on cable?
Yep.
The news, some cooking shows, not anything entertaining that I would be watching on Netflix or anything else.
Well, and the news is an interesting point because you have decades of kind of, if you're leaning one direction, you have this channel. If you're leaning another direction, you have this channel, and you have a few kind of in-betweeners. But for us even, and I would say probably you and I might get them even differently, but the birth of like live video in Portland, Oregon, we had over 100 days of protests during Black Lives Matter. And so I have people from back east where I grew up that are reading news stories or watching news on Fox News or CNN or something, and their view of what's happening is very different from mine, where I'm like, you don't need to follow what, a personality on TV is saying, because you can find live video of the people who are there. It's not just a momentary thing. This is over 3 months worth of people,
right?
Thousands of people out there. It's very easy to just have a bird's eye view right now of right where you're talking about.
And you can get multiple perspectives because everyone's on their phones, live streaming what's going on as they walk into these protests. Everyone's making YouTube videos of, this is what me and my friends just did. So it's like, you're right. You don't have just one TV personality telling you, reporting on what's happening. You have a whole community of hundreds of people who are there who are all trying to share what happened at one given moment.
Yeah. And I think that this has implications for people of the Christian faith, because we have built churches to be centers for disseminating information, right? And it's spiritual information, and it's spiritual, it's the idea of kind of the learning and community coming together. But the way that people used to have that is they would have to go to a place to find it, right? So if you want to hear a sermon, you have to walk to a church to hear a sermon. If you want to find people, you have to go to where the people are physically sitting and or standing or doing an activity. Now that's really not the case, and I think it's thrown the church into like an identity crisis. Because like, do you need a physical building to find a sermon? No.
Not at all.
Do you need a physical building to find community? Not at all.
No,
right?
Yeah.
So the question of what does church look like 20 years from now is a pretty big one,
It is.
And I think it would be even different answers between my generation, your generation, and the one after you.
You're right in that we get exposed to things through the internet. And so a lot of us love to watch church online. And so we find like we get really into their worship style, and then we want to bring that into our home churches, and they're like, what is this? And we're like, we saw it on YouTube. And they're like, I don't know about that one.
Yep.
I don't know about that one. But it's this influence of influencers who aren't even necessarily trying to be influencers, right? Because they're really just recording their services and posting them online. Like, there really isn't that like persona that they're putting on. It's just sharing different types of churches.
And I bring that up because The struggle for a voice in church and religious spaces, I think, is changing in what that looks like for you guys than what it did for us. For us, there was still so much of like, do as we say, and we're not interested in hearing a single thing that you have to say. You just obey, and you do church the way we tell you to, and you should be happy about it, and you should volunteer yourself.
Pretty much.
And that didn't work for millennials. It didn't work for Generation X, the one before us. And so there's just kind of been this massive drop, especially as people reach college age. But I would be curious for you, like, church is one of those remaining relics of an older time. What is it like coming from the history and the background and the formation of you in, as you come into your teenage years and college years? And what is it like to walk back into that world when you come into pews and the same Bibles that have been there since my grandparents were kids?
Yes, and they're dusty. I think it's really interesting because I've seen a lot of our generation and many others went to summer camp. And summer camp was like a great place to learn about God because you get to be active at the same time. And there's a study on attention spans and how attention spans have changed through generations. And I think we're at like 7 seconds,
right,
Gen Z, before we lose focus. And so the format of church, of sitting in one room, listening to one person talk, is not great for us at all. We cannot handle it. And so something like camp and being outdoors and going on a hike with your friends and having like brunch and a sermon at the top of a mountain is a lot more of what we like, because we can be active at the same time that we worship. And so this whole idea even of like online worship, I can be, cooking breakfast. It's this idea of doing two things at once. And it doesn't have to be multitasking like you're doing laundry, but it's just this idea of like, I'm not sitting down in an uncomfortable pew.
Right.
I think that's like the real big difference of worship, especially on campus. I've seen a lot of like, let's do service at the same time. Like, let's like have a worship thought together in a room, but then let's go leave and do something else, And I think like that's the biggest shift is like our church looks more interactive because we just cannot sit still. Like that's why all of these fidget spinners and everyone's like, why is everyone into fidget spinners and slime? And it's like, because we need to be doing something with our hands. I have a fidget ring on right now. Like that's just how we're wired.
Yeah.
And so the concept of sitting in a pew is not appealing to anyone that I know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I'm interested in talking about the different stages of life and like what it looks like to you, because there are some pretty big differences between our generations. I lived until I was 18 years old in a world that was, social media was definitely like an afterthought or like a fun idea. And like some people had it, but you didn't use it for serious things. There wasn't a industry there. And so by the time you guys come around, this is normalized as a daily use thing.
We are the digital natives.
Yeah, you guys have kind of known this natively. But I have people asking me advice on your generation that I don't have the right or knowledge to give. Where they're just like, well, how do we connect with college kids? I'm like, am I in college? I don't know. I'm learning too.
We have that gap too. So I have my friends asking, how do you talk to adults? And I'm like, oh, they're not all that bad.
Yeah. The feeling that I get in talking with Gen Z is just like, I have to get all of this out so fast or they'll stop listening to me.
Oh.
Like I am going to immediately bore whoever I talk to because they can't pay attention to what I'm saying.
Right.
It's not relatable.
Right.
And so it's just like, how do you create a relationship where you don't feel interesting to the other person, right? It seems impossible.
I am blessed because I was raised around a lot of older people. I was the baby of my family for most of my life. And so I spent most of my time with my grandparents who would take me to hang out with their old people friends and we would all play card games and, eat together. And so talking to people of older generations has always come easy to me because I was kind of forced into that space.
Yeah.
And I've noticed in comparison to my friends, that is so not the case. Like even with things of just like ordering at a restaurant and talking to adults in like a service setting, other people are so awkward about that because it's like, no, I'm fine. I didn't need ketchup anyways. it's a-okay. I don't want to be an inconvenience.
Yeah. I feel like I've encountered a lot of nervous Gen Z, or like not shy, but like there's some panic if you talk to, like, it's just, It's like
Oh, no.
they've been singled out, the spotlight's on them, and they're like, like, what do I do? And I'm just like, I'm not trying to do that to you. I just want to know you, and I don't know how.
Yes, that's fair. That's very, very fair.
I've had a couple times where I've been really faked out. I remember I was on a Christian campus. There was this person who had worked at a summer camp that my peers had worked at.
Mhm.
So there's this big age difference between them, but I knew them through my friends. We had never met in person, and I was in the lunch line, and they came up and they're like, hey, are you Caleb? And I'm like, yeah. I know who you are because you worked at this camp with my friends and all this stuff. I was there alone. And so I was about to ask, like, can I sit with you?
Yes.
Because to me, I'm just like, Ed, I don't feel weird about this,
Mhm.
And like the instant nerves when I like started walking the same direction that they were walking,
Oh,
they were just
goodness.
they started like blushing a little. And I was just like, okay, no. Whatever I'm doing to this person, I'm not going to do that. So, and I'm just like, what did I do wrong? Like, how do I say that? How do I just say, like, I think you're cool and I want to sit with you for lunch, and that can be that.
And that can be that, right? It's the weird, we're not that different in age, but we're so different in life stages that it feels like, why would you want to talk to me?
Yeah.
Like I'm over here stressing about homework and finals.
Yep.
You don't have that.
That's true. But the responsibility is always on the person with more power, right?
Mhm.
This is something I preached to my elders, and now I have to live,
Mhm.
is that if you have the church positions, if you have the government positions, if you have the social positions, it is your responsibility to create space for the people who have less power than you
Mhm.
and less voice than you. And if that means people with short attention spans, that means people with short attention spans, and you got to do it their way,
Yeah.
just like we expected our elders to do it for us. And that is very difficult to do,
Mhm.
but it's necessary.
Me and my grandma, I just talked to her on the phone on the way here. Like that took learning for her to learn how to FaceTime us and to learn, how to text us and stuff like that. And so it's the want for connection that makes her do those things. I was just telling you, she had an Instagram. I was like, how did my grandma get an Instagram? Me and my brother as her grandkids. Neither one of us taught her that.
Yeah.
So what? It's because of this want to be in our lives.
Yeah.
And she understands that. Where are they? They're on their phone.
Yeah.
They're on their Instagram. And so her DMing me on Instagram, while it's hilarious,
Yep.
it is so loving
Mhm.
that she's taking that step to go out of her comfort zone and to teach herself something new so that she can stay connected to her grandkids. And I think it's so interesting. We've even seen have you seen all of the card games that are like getting to know you card games, trying to assist everyone
Yeah.
and this need for connection, but this really confusing,
Yeah.
what do we talk about? Like, I really love We're Not Really Strangers. And they did a kids edition recently that I thought was super cool of like, you're trying to talk to, us 8-year-old.
Right.
What do you,
Right.
how do you have deeper conversation than what's your favorite color?
Yep.
And I think a lot of people are loving that because you can keep it on the table. And when friends and family come over and you're like, we're staring at each other.
If you were to look at the things that you don't want to, I think with any generation, older or younger, there are things where you're like, yes, that is so awesome. I want to take that. Also, all of these other things, I don't really want that.
Honestly, millennials are like the cool ants, like they're not quite your peers, but they act like they are. So you're like, like every time you go to a millennial's house, you'd be like, they have the coolest game room ever.
That's true.
They have the coolest decor ever.
We're still renting and we have nothing left, but at least we have the board games.
Exactly.
At least we got our Funko Pop figures.
The Funko. But it feels like you're the big kids. You're everything we want to be. We don't want to be our parents. We don't, like money, 9-to-5 job. But you guys are the cool ones. So I think there is this aspect of looking up to, and like that's what we hope to do. When we graduate and we finally get there, is just enjoy life. But we do have a difference in communication styles that I've realized a lot. I was just telling someone the other day, they were like, oh, what's your favorite mode of communication? And I was like, video. Like if you send me a video of you talking to me, that's my favorite because I can get your facial expressions. I can get the tone of your voice, and you've had enough time to sit with your thoughts to say what you need to say and like think about it. And so it's not like this very rushed, pressured, I'm staring at you, give me an answer kind of thing. And I don't think that millennials would say the same thing at all.
I agree. I can only speak for myself individually because I do have millennial friends who do prefer like voice message or a video message. But for me, text and audio. I mean, it's everything because I don't want to watch a video. Like, it bothers me when somebody sends me like 5 voice memos. I'm like, I'm never going to open these. I can't stand just being there staring into space while something happens to me.
And you know
Like-
what Gen Z would say to that? They say, press play and then continue to fold your laundry.
Yeah, I don't want to. I want to, like, I'm a written word person. I feel like my written word is more me than my spoken word.
Mm-hmm. I feel like part of this difference comes from diaries too,
Sure.
right? Because you all, wrote in journals, and it's not like we don't do that, but video diaries have become a huge thing. And like even growing up on YouTube, right? Like that's what people were really using YouTube for. Like it was video diaries, and then we started doing the same thing for ourselves. And so there's this intimacy through like someone by themselves in a room talking to a screen that makes them more honest and genuine and real. And I think that's how we build connection in a weird way.
Just practically and technically, there are things that allow you guys at an earlier age to create those things. If you think about the amount of storage you had on a phone when I was 18.
Yeah.
You didn't have the ability to just store a bunch of videos of yourself in general. I remember when Facebook, in its early days, I was still in high school, was advertising that you could store 300 pictures. And that was a marketing point. Like people flocked to that because you could store 300 pictures online. There wasn't just this limitless amount of storage. There wasn't this limitless amount of data. You had to pay a lot if you wanted more data. And so those things weren't even available to us until our 20s,
Yeah.
And so like the way that you learn to communicate becomes ingrained in your head, and it becomes the most natural thing. It's the same thing with our elders, why they didn't like phones in general. Because they've been reading and writing for a long, long time
Can we have
now.
an in-person conversation, please?
Yeah. And so you have people who lived decades in these worlds. I interviewed a lady who is 94 recently, and I was just thinking about her timeline, right? Because I was trying to explain like, hey, we're going to take this story and we're going to put it on the internet for people to read. And she's like, oh, what is that like? And I'm like going through, I'm trying to have kind of some understanding of where she's coming from. And I'm like, this person was like 70 before the internet started being a popular thing for people to use. If you can imagine, all of this has happened since this woman was 70. That's a lot of life to live
Right.
before all this stuff. And like if you think about like how ingrained ideas and habits become and how quickly, and then you live those for decades, like it's easier to understand why people think that this is temporary because it's in such a short period of their life. And I think that we're seeing within the digital space a difference in communication, where digital doesn't just mean we all think the same or communicate the same, but there's a whole lot of different ways that goes.
There's a lot of variety.
Even as we take this episode, we're going to cut it into an audio-only podcast. We're going to cut it into a YouTube show. We're going to cut clips for the people who would never watch either of those and only want the 7-second, 30-second best of thing, and maybe they'll listen if it's good enough, And so we're doing that because those are all completely different minds.
They are.
And completely different audiences, and they all live and exist at the same time in history.
It's crazy. I think we're adapting a lot to creative ways of thinking. For a long time, I think there was just a trend in our society that like we all have to learn the same way. And I think we're finally getting to this point of like, we don't all consume information the same at all. I had a professor who was like, what are your favorite ways to consume information in class? And he gave us articles to read, videos to watch, podcasts to listen to, and it's all on the same topic, but you get to pick what is easiest and most comfortable for you. And I was like, that is so cool.
Yeah, I'd go straight for the podcast because I have enough of what you were talking about earlier where I want to be out on a walk, listening, and I can internalize the things that are going on better audibly. It jars my brain to hear just a little clip of something. Like I want the half-hour podcast.
Gotcha.
I want the hour podcast. I want the deep dive into what the heck this thing is before I can really like say like, I feel satisfied with that I learned something.
Yes.
My wife though has got me, she's like, okay, I know you don't like TikTok for entertainment. I'm like, yes, but I have to learn it, right? And she's like, but what if you did it for education? She got me hooked on Spooky Lake Month. Spooky Lake Month is a water scientist who talks about like strange water history. One of them was on Crater Lake, and it's called the Old Man of Crater Lake or something. And it's a standing tree that has been floating in Crater Lake upright with a piece sticking out of it for like over a century.
Weird.
And so I'm just like, oh, that is cool. Like, where are more of these? I feel like an old man, like with his glasses and coffee, like, oh,
Yes.
wow, okay, the youths have something here.
So glad that this is what's getting you into TikTok.
But like, the weird thing about living in a digital space for work and for ministry and for purpose too, is that there was a day when somebody could say, I want to go into television, and they could count on that being a 50-year career. In social media, you can't. You can have that job for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
But you will be outdated by whatever comes along next. And even those platforms work completely differently from month to month.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like we're being forced to be learners. I would say that your generation is a giant driving force in making us learn.
Well, thanks. We're trying.
If we ever want to connect with you guys, and like eventually we're just going to be 70 and 80-year-olds,
Mm-hmm.
the difference in our age is going to be minuscule. And if we want those kinds of relationships in our lives, we have to learn as you create things and as you lean into things that we didn't. I think Gen Z has this great golden opportunity where your spaces that you can be in actually have more of a variety of people, but also your information that you can access really easily is more diverse. For me, I grew up in almost an exclusively white, conservative, Republican kind of Christianity. And the way that I phrase this is like, I was told about everybody in the world by white people, by
Right.
straight people, by conservative people. So I had their version of everyone. But as the internet kind of came to be and I was able to hear from people themselves, that was like new. I didn't have to like be the awkward person to go into like a black church and be like, I'm here to learn, guys. Like, teach me about your ways. You know what I mean? Like,
Take me in, please.
There was a little bit of like separation where I could say, okay, but I can start watching sermons. I can read books by black authors. There's a whole lot of ways that I became aware that I could learn that had less pressure than people who had to do everything physically,
Right.
And I think, that's really caused some tension between my generation and the church, because if you grow up in one kind of cultural group in the church, that's the right way. And we're the right ones and everybody else needs to learn from us. For a long time, I was just going to our elders saying, please listen to us. And so my contact with other generations was very upward. It was very toward the elder. And so now I have to go in both directions, right? And so I have to access two very, very different worlds, both completely different from mine. And it is weird coming in as an older person, like you were talking about, my generation isn't really the parent generation to Gen Z for
Correct.
the most part.
Yeah.
And so we're in this in between where it's like we're just starting to have so much more like responsibility that we're keeping up with, and we've had it for a long time. But I think just the world is different, where like interpersonal drama isn't really interesting as much. Celebrity drama isn't as interesting as much. And so you're just trying to figure out like,
Where's the common ground?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, how do I just say, I'm just trying to talk to you because I'm interested in knowing you, the person,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing else. Like, no strings attached. You don't have money that I want. There's nothing I want out of you except that
I want to get to know you.
Exactly.
Pure and simple.
Like, what would be some advice in like a better way
To approach
to
that.
interact?
That's a good question.
Or is there? And maybe this is just not going to be a thing.
I hope there is. In this weird way, you guys are almost like a parental figure, but you're not old enough to be necessarily. And so it turns into like this, where it's like older brother, little brother concept. And so there's like this superiority of like, I can't be completely myself, completely real, completely honest. And I think we kind of have to break those down a little bit, because I've run into people who worked at the same summer camp I did, but I was a camper. And so seeing them now, I'm like, I like looked up to you for 5 years at summer camp.
Yeah.
You don't know I exist. That's fine. But it's this weird, like, we will always remember them as your older sister or whatever, even if you're like 4 years apart.
And millennials are caught between, we've spent a lot of our lives looked down on by older generations. Like, we're killing this industry. We're not doing this right. We're not coming to work the same way. We're not, like, all these things. It was just negative, negative, negative. And millennials stink and we hate them, And so we're used to being treated as less than. We're used to being really criticized. And I don't know that we have lived long enough to really internalize that anyone could look up to us. It's not that you won't find a millennial who is super arrogant or, is any example of anything that you could find. But for the most part, because we don't often have the house, the kids, the car, we haven't achieved all of these things we were promised by our late 20s, 30s, 40s. We're in an in-between where it's like, well, have I earned the place where anyone could look up to me? I'm not the boss of anyone, I'm not the parent of anyone. And so I think that there are times where someone actually does, and we just cannot accept it. Just for the life of us, like you could tell us straight and we would just be like, thank you so much for being so nice.
That's sweet of you.
Oh, that's great. You're trying to make me feel better, but at no point would it be like, oh, that's true, and I should act in a way that I understand and believe it's true. It's not just a compliment, but it's a responsibility. That if somebody looks up to you, that you treat them with care and respect and give them the space that they need to keep, however that needs to work in their life.
Right. Millennials haven't been an outstanding problem to Gen Z. I look at millennials as they're the ones enjoying life right now.
And I would say in some ways we haven't had the power to be. When you look at a lot of what, a lot of social justice movements, a lot of activism, you're fighting against power, right? And abuse of power. And you can put a cultural label on that. You can put a sexual orientation label on that. Whatever it is, it always comes down to how people use the power that they have. And if you have a generation that has very little power other than what they say, we just haven't had the ability in some cases to make the mistakes of our elders because we weren't the boss. And so you have less power to hurt people when you have less power over people. And so I would say it's less about being better people and more about just not getting the chance to make massive mistakes. I don't know what that looks like for us. My big fear is that we're going to, in my generation, repeat some of the mistakes of our parents and grandparents in just being attentive to our own needs, our own peers, wanting to get our own friends established into leadership roles, and we will leave out everyone after us. And if we do that, we will continue to destroy the world. I mean, for real.
Yeah.
Politics, church, you name it, business. It's selfishness and the unwillingness to learn from those behind us, and the unwillingness to prepare a world for them that would really make or break us. We are coming into that phase of life. One thing that has come out of my journey from my 20s into my 30s is we pushed and pushed and pushed so hard, especially against Christianity, especially against abuses of our church, that we actually started kind of toppling over into these issues where we were given platforms. My life is an example of that. I was seen as very antagonistic to the church for a long time, despite the fact that I didn't feel antagonistic. Right. I was just pointing out harm that we cause. And that led to me literally being hired by the church. And it's like, okay, you see the problems, help us fix them.
Right.
And then all of a sudden there's all this responsibility, right? Where you're like, okay, I will do that. And I have to wrap my mind around how.
Yeah.
Because you learn so much about the dynamics that people were working with. Well, you really want to do this? Okay, where's the money for that? Or where's the people that want to get behind that? Where are the people who want to volunteer their time and do the work of building policy, right? Nobody wants to sit in a room and read through hundreds of pages of policy and see which things you can change. But that's what it takes to make structural change. And so, it's much easier to call out the problems that you see than it is to fix them.
Oh, yes. I've been learning that one the hard way.
Yep.
I think in an interesting way, you guys are who is going to start recruiting us to help with that.
Yeah.
Because I've been approached about that a lot, because we also have this want for change. And a common theme in Gen Z is like, well, we'll just leave. We'll just leave. We'll just do something else. We'll just not, I don't want to go through the steps of solving that. And so I think millennials have to help us with our patience.
Yeah.
And staying to fix the problem. Because you're right. No one wants to do the heavy lifting.
Mm-hmm.
And even Gen Z has already run into that issue of, we want change. Oh, okay, we'll do this, and that. Well, we don't want to do all that. We just want it to change right now. And if you're not willing to do that, I guess we'll just leave. We'll just part ways. And so if anything, you guys could be the bridging gap for that because of your open-mindedness and, being on the same page about these things. It's just having the patience together to get through the boring parts that take change.
The necessity for two-way mentorship
Mm-hmm.
is becoming more and more obvious as the years go on, because we will always need the wisdom of our elders. We will always need people who have done the thing that we want to try to tell us, like, what was that like? What did you run into? It's almost like somebody going into like a jungle or a cave or something for the first time. You want to know where the danger is. You want to know where the right path is. At the same time, with a world that is evolving so quickly, and with especially digital spaces and cultural spaces being created by people younger than us very, very quickly from day to day, more and more, we can't live our lives in a productive way without mentorship from our elders and those younger than us. There are things that we as millennials have to learn from people younger than us. Or, within the communication field, you won't have a job.
Yeah.
Within just your life,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be quickly overtaken by just this information and movement of people from week to week, and you'll be left not understanding the world that you live in. And so I think that's why learning to talk to each other is so important, at least to me, but to many people that I've encountered too, is just, if we don't learn that, the two-way mentorship can't exist because we can't talk to each other, And so I would say, if I were putting a wall up, the title of our show is Bridges Over Walls. The wall that I'm identifying is just, this way of learning from those younger than us, and how on the earth do we do that practically? How would you frame the wall here? Like, what's the thing to build a bridge over?
I think our generation has to not think that we know everything. And I suppose every young person goes through that era of, I know the way it should be and how to get it done. And so because of that, we can have the tendency to not be the best listeners. And so we have to get over that wall of arrogance of, oh, the old people don't know what they're talking about. It's like, well, it's not quite how this
It's sometimes true.
It's sometimes true, not 100% fact though.
Yeah.
And give credit for, like, if there weren't people before us, we wouldn't be where we are now. We wouldn't have the internet to the extent we are now. Like, someone had to admit it. Someone had to be there for the beginning. And that doesn't make the older generations ignorant, And so we have to have that understanding and that kindness of, like, okay, they do know things.
Yeah.
And we do have things we can learn from our elders, even if sometimes it's very frustrating conversations. There is learning to be had, that two-way mentorship you were talking about. Everyone's fear is always that it's going to get more impersonal and we're just going to keep putting space in between us and, we're never going to have in-person conversation anymore. I don't think that's true. I think that, again, we're just going to lean into the variety of it all. And honestly, maybe that's how church is going to get separated, right? Like, it's going to be the people who like to watch podcasts or listen to podcasts at home with their families on Sabbath, and people who want to go in person and do a hike with the community on Sabbath. And, like, we're going to be not sectionalized, but we might be split up a little bit more into just methods of worship and ways of intaking information. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that creativity in worship is needed, and it's something that could be so much fun. And if you just, you had a large community and you had all these different options of, like, we're going to paint worship today, or we're going to, go play music today. And, like, you just got to pick and choose and mix and match and switch it up. I think that would help so much in your spiritual life, right?